attending CCWC's end-of-year webinar. I'm Jason Schmelzer. I'm CCWC's Managing Director and Lobbyist. I've been with the association 16 years now as staff. I'm also a former board member prior to that. So I've been around for quite a while working on these issues. We're going to run through sort of three real categories today. One, we always like to give a quick update on the political landscape here in California. Two, we'll do a review of what happened here in 2025. We got the final signatures and vetoes yesterday. And then we will do a brief preview on 2020.
Listen to MCLE, but you guys can come in.
Perfect. You will be muted upon entrance, and Aaron will keep muting you if you come off. Questions will be allowed mid-presentation. What I'm going to ask you to do is raise your hand, and I will call on you when I've got the appropriate time to do so, and then you'll be off mute, ask your question, and I'll do my best to answer it. Don't try to stump me, please. And that's about it. So we will get started. I'll give folks another 15 seconds or so, and then we will jump right in. Thank you all for being here. All right. So we'll start off easy. First of all, who is CCWC? What do we do? Why are we here? Here's a little bit of CCWC at a glance. We do a fair amount of education and outreach. We do webinars like this. Typically for our members, we opened up this particular webinar to non-members as well. But we do this a few times a year to provide updates on the legislative process and whatnot. We do a lobby day, sometimes, not all the time. It used to be that lobby days were pretty normal, but frankly, they've become so overwhelming in the legislature that in most cases, I think it's a net draw for whatever advocacy you're trying to do. It's good for the members. It's not necessarily good for what you're trying to achieve. So we do it situationally as needed. And then obviously, our sort of flagship event is our annual conference. That is in the summertime, so it just passed. That'll be July 7th through 9th, 2026 in Orange County at the Disney Grand Californian. It will be our 22nd annual conference. We're very proud of it. We think it's the premier workers' comp conference in the state of California and maybe even broader than that. So come if you haven't. Advocacy is really the core of what we do here at CCWC. Obviously, the California State Legislature is right across the street. You can't see it, but I swear it's right there. And we spend a fair amount of time over there working with the legislature on their various ideas in the workers' comp system. We also follow that up and work with the folks at the Division of Workers' Compensation, DIR, Labor Agency, Cal-OSHA, any number of other regulatory bodies as laws are passed by the legislature and then implemented. Obviously, you need to sort of follow up on the passage of legislation. You can't just sort of let it go from the end of the legislative process. And then we also like to focus on state-funded research. Obviously, the Commission on Health and Safety and Workers' Compensation is a great asset. We tend to point to Cheeswick quite a bit when there's a complex legislative issue or regulatory issue that frankly needs more study or perspective before action is taken by the legislature. And then we also have a small political action committee. Small but mighty, we like to say. So we do engage politically to some degree, but we're certainly not up there with labor unions in terms of what we do there. So that's sort of at a glance. One of the things I like to talk about before we get into too much of the year is just the political landscape. I think whether it's California or any other state, a lot of the time, stakeholders, participants, the voters are left sort of scratching their heads, wondering what the legislature is thinking. So it's important to sort of understand the field of play. And California is a very unique political venue. We are the fourth largest economy in the world. Somehow, that's amazing. Only surpassed by the United States as a whole, China, and Germany. And when you compare us against the next state, so, like our little brother, we're 50% larger than the second placed economy, which is Texas. So we're 1.5 Texases in terms of our economy. That means in large part, the folks who run the state largely see us as really our own entity. We're big enough to be a large nation. We are large and geographically, economically, culturally diverse. You've got our sort of north-south divide, right, which is sort of like water and baseball, maybe is how I would characterize that. And then our sort of east-west divide, which is more political and cultural divide. But we're a very complex state. And if you sort of enter blind, maybe a lot of what happens here won't make sense. So we're going to run through some politics real quick in case you're all not sick of politics. Okay. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but California is a deep blue state. I'm old enough to remember when we used to consider ourselves sort of purple. We elected Ronald Reagan, right? He was a former governor of the state. We produced the governor. But come 2025, California is solidly blue. A few data points here to sort of drive that point home. The last Republican in statewide office was 2011. Democrats have controlled the state legislature since I graduated high school, which is 30 years ago, for those of you doing the math, 1994. The Democrats have had a supermajority for north of a decade. That means that they've got a 2/3 supermajority in the state legislature, and they control everything. The minority party, I don't even think needs to show up to establish a quorum at this point. They can pass new taxes. They can change the rules of the legislature as long as they're not constitutional. So they are solidly in control. And the reason is because that's where the voters are. There is a strong voter registration lead in the state of California, even though you see more folks dipping into the sort of independent category. We'll talk about those. Democrats still have a strong lead. Most of the flow into the independent category has come from Republicans. And this sort of matters for a few reasons. One, as it pertains to the Republicans, it sort of creates atrophy, right? You don't have really a statewide political machine that can compete at a certain point. After a number of years goes by and you haven't won any statewide offices, your candidate pipeline dries up. You've got very few members of the legislature who then advance to statewide offices, get that sort of statewide campaign experience, get used to the statewide media, and then basically prepare to run for big offices like governor, U.S. senator. You just don't have that pipeline of candidates. And then after you lose for a while, sort of like sports teams, your fan base starts to go away. The money dries up. National Republicans don't want to invest in the state of California because it's sort of good money after bad. So this does have a sort of knock-on effect as time goes by. Republicans actually get weaker for having been weak previously. But California is a deep blue state. A little bit of texture on that. If you look at this slide, you're basically taking the parties, their registration, and splitting it up between liberal, conservative, and moderate. What I really want you to take away here is that if you look at both the Democrat and Republican lines, you see the vast majority of folks are either liberal or conservative. There's not a lot of moderates or like conservative Democrats or liberal Republicans. So a lot of what you see in the broader political context exists here in California as well. Energy towards the left if you're a Democrat, energy towards the right if you're a Republican. There are lots of moderates in the independent category. Unfortunately, there are no independents in the state legislature, just Republicans and Democrats. So you really miss that moderating force. And when you're working on something like workers' compensation, which can be pretty emotionally charged, both I think on the employer side and sort of the labor side, the reason that this is important is you sort of get less pragmatism and more dogmatism out of the legislature, which can be very frustrating when you're trying to bring the temperature down, you're trying to move away from anecdote, you're trying to get legislators to focus on data instead of, sort of one-off stories that are somewhat misleading at times. So it can be somewhat frustrating, but it's nothing unique. This is, I think, duplicated across states, across political bodies. Um, okay, even the independent voters, just to drive the point home, even the independent voters lean Democratic. 39% of registered likely independent voters lean Democratic. They've got a 50% um, lead over the Republicans. Even the infrequent voters, again, lean Democrat. So strong Democratic registration, obviously strong Democratic political performance. And then even the independents veer towards the Democratic Party. I do think some of that is the Trump era impacts, sort of pushing independent voters away from the Republican Party for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into. Um, but all of this is to say we are a very solidly blue state. We are not purple, and that is the environment in which we operate, and it can be difficult. So what do Californians care about? We know that they elect Democrats. Obviously, on the left, what we're looking at is sort of national questions. On the right, what we're looking at is California questions. So we're a solidly blue state, but what do people care about? I think it sort of breaks down to Californians are concerned with the current federal administration, but also wishes gas and housing was cheaper in the state of California, and they're very frustrated about that. You saw that, I think, in the 2024 federal and congressional elections. I think Democrats were somewhat surprised to have lost to Donald Trump and the Republicans. And when the sort of rubber met the road afterwards and everybody was doing the postmortem, it was largely driven by concerns about affordability, cost of living, those types of things. So that's where the voters are here in the state of California. What is the legislature doing? What are they focused on? Are they focused on the same things that the voters are? I think in large part, the answer is yes. I think they mirror the voters' concerns pretty pragmatically. One, climate change continues to be a large issue for California legislators. They had to reauthorize their cap and trade program, which is functionally the state's program for taxing greenhouse gas emissions and then taking that money and investing it in emission reduction purposes, technologies, programs, et cetera. That continues to be a large focus for the state legislature. Housing and homelessness obviously continues to be a significant issue here in the state. Our budget, it's been 2 or 3 years of rough budgets. Those are going to continue. California has a sort of structurally difficult setup in that we rely very heavily on extraordinarily wealthy people to pay taxes. But extraordinarily wealthy people make money sort of in fits and spurts. And when the economy sours and you don't have IPOs and you don't have a lot of the things that make the state of California a lot of money, our finances can dip significantly, and then we come sort of into tension with our preferences on spending. So that can be a struggle and continues to be a struggle right now. Artificial intelligence. I think it's fair not to say that this is a moral panic like some others, but change is coming fast with AI. We're going to talk about it even as it pertains to workers' compensation policy. We opposed some AI bills this year somehow, even though it's workers' comp that we focus on. But this is a huge issue for the state of California, and I'm sure in all of our lives. But that's an area of definite focus. Wildfire response, obviously, if you live in California, you're familiar with the wildfires, maybe even if you don't. We obviously started the year with an absolutely devastating wildfire in the Los Angeles area, and the legislature has spent a fair amount of time focusing not only on recovering from the wildfire, but looking at state laws that may slow rebuilding, and trying to adjust those laws and those sort of barriers to successfully recovering from the wildfire. Affordability and cost of living was actually discussed quite a bit in the legislature this year. It was nice to hear. I don't think that's something that we hear very frequently, but following the election last year, and I think heading into the midterms, that's definitely top of mind for both the majority party and the minority party. And then finally, Trump, response to the Trump administration. I'm sure you've all been watching the news. We've been having some fun with it here in the state of California. It's been a good time. We'll cover it in a minute. But the state legislature, just so you know, introduces roughly 2,500 bills every year. So 2,500 new laws that are proposed, maybe really more around like 2,250 when you take out the budget bills and some of the other sort of non-bill bills like resolutions and things of that nature. But there is a lot going on. It's an extraordinarily active venue, and there is a lot to do. So we ended with Trump. Let's talk about Trump a bit because it's hard to be a Californian without thinking about Trump these days. So strangely enough, the same number of Californians who liked Trump in 2016 like him today. Roughly 30% of Californians approve of Trump. Those numbers have not changed. It is precisely what his numbers were when he was elected in 2016. I think that may change. That number may drop in this coming year, and I'm going to run you through maybe a few of the reasons. One, Californians, I think, see Trump as largely combative with us geographically and philosophically, right? He's a New Yorker, notably not chill, like Californians tend to be. And then there's also just a cyclical nature to this. When Joe Biden's president, when Barack Obama is president, Bill Clinton is president, it's Texas. That's really combative with the federal government, and the federal government's combative with Texas. When a Republican's in office, and especially with Donald Trump, it tends to be California. So we're just in the California cycle. But a lot has happened. Again, we started the year with LA wildfires and frankly, sort of the politics of blame around the recovery and the federal disaster assistance. There was a lot of talk of withholding emergency assistance from the state of California, which was not appreciated. The EPA has pulled environmental waivers. Obviously, you've seen the ICE raids and the deployment of National Guard to LA. We are having a redistricting fight. We have Prop 50 on the ballot here in November. There's obviously been some activity sort of attacking universities on the basis of DEI policy and civil rights enforcement. There's been the pulling back of high-speed rail funds. It sort of seems like, anytime the president can poke the state of California, he does so. And then there are all of the all caps tweets, which we've all seen. So I think all of that, in addition to sort of the geographic, philosophical, sort of top line concerns, have Californians somewhat fussy with the president. But, for our part, we haven't been particularly passive in this fight. The state of California has filed 40 lawsuits since the beginning of the year, and quite successfully, I will say. Only about half of those have reached preliminary decisions. The state won 17 of 19 of those cases that were decided. Most are on appeal. So who knows where it all ends. Some of it, I'm sure, will go to SCOTUS, some of it won't. But for our part, we haven't exactly taken this fight laying down. California is up, with its fists up, ready to fight back. So that is what is going on with the president. How's the governor faring in all of this? I think he's doing reasonably well for somebody who's in the 7th of 8 years. Typically over time, unless you're extra special, the voters start to get a little tired of you. But the governor is pretty consistent. He's still up over 50%, which if you're in national politics, it's pretty darn good. He sort of started this year after the election last year as sort of like abundance Gavin, if you, pay attention to sort of the Ezra Klein theory of being a Democrat. He started his podcast. He sort of changed up some of his rhetoric. He interviewed people like Charlie Kirk and Michael Savage and, people who are sort of fundamentally opposed to where he is politically. But there's been somewhat of a recent switch in strategy. He is sort of, I think it began with mockery. Now it's, I think, leaning into the idea that it's working. But he started sort of all cap tweeting back at Trump and sort of using some of the same trolley energy that the president uses in his pushback against the president. And this is sort of interesting because I think the inclination of a lot of Democrats after the loss of the election last year was to moderate, right? A lot of, especially us moderate nonpartisans, tend to tell people to moderate. But if you look at what happened with Republicans after they lost to Joe Biden in 2020, they did not moderate. They sort of doubled down on the Trump era politics. And for those of you who are, keeping track, it worked for them. And I think if you're a Democrat, you're probably asking yourself which path is best. If you're the governor, you might believe that sort of acting more like Trump and being somewhat more combative is working for you. He is, at least as of August, sort of in the pole position for the Democratic nomination. It is very early. I will add that. But when you're the governor of the state of California and everybody expects you to be running for president, it doesn't hurt to be out that far. And one of the things I'd like to point out is if you look at the two lines, the light blue line was June and the darker blue line is August. His sort of change in approach to combating the president has yielded results. I think Democrats want to see somebody who is slightly more combative, similar, frankly, to what Republicans did after Trump lost. And if you're paying attention to like sort of all of the signatures and vetoes that the governor made over the last several days, I think you could read some of the vetoes in particular in the context of a coming national competition. So things are working out relatively well for the governor. This, I promise, is our last political slide. You're welcome. We have a gubernatorial election. Obviously, coming into next year, we have a statewide election. The governor's moving on, maybe to greater things, maybe not. So there's an opening at the top. I've started crossing candidates out just so you could see some of the people who have sort of walked away from the race at this point. But the race is wide open at this point. You've got a few Republicans down at the bottom. And then you've got a host of probably known names for those of you from the state of California that are all vying for the job. Kamala Harris has selected out. There was a lot of energy earlier this summer around potentially having her run for governor. It seems, though, she might be angling for another presidential run. Rob Bonta, who's the state's attorney general, dropped out very early, which was a little bit surprising. I think a lot of us saw Rob Bonta as leading the pack and the most likely successful candidate. But he is also very busy suing the federal government quite a bit. And I think he both cares about that substantively, and he would be somewhat silly to not see it as a good political platform for him. Obviously, we'll get national attention doing that. And then the lieutenant governor and the former head of the Senate also dropped out. So we've got a host of names that will be competing. Who knows if other candidates come to the top? Right now in polling, Katie Porter has been in the lead, but we'll see how that goes. She's obviously been in the news recently for some slightly problematic behavior. So we come into this election next year, which is a little bit strange when you are focusing on the legislature. So, okay, bottom line politically, more cowbell. Nothing is going to change here in California. We are going to stay a democratically dominated state. The conditions will still favor those who tend to disagree with us. Labor unions, the California Applicant Attorneys Association, the source of most of the bills that we oppose, are those two sort of categories. The environment will still lean heavily towards protecting workers, even if there's a negative impact on private employers. But as you'll read later, the state will protect themselves. Okay, it's time to touch on the 2025 legislative session. It's been a busy year, so let's go ahead and get going. I'm going to touch very briefly on some legislative workers' comp history. For those of you who were listening to what I said about AI earlier, just, these AI-generated images are pretty fantastic. When you're talking about workers' comp legislative history in the state of California, you really do need to have like before Arnold, after Arnold. If you go back 20 plus years, the late 90s, early 2000s, We had some really unfriendly bills that were passed by labor and the applicant attorneys. The system spun out of control. Those of you who were in workers' comp back in the day remember it. That's when I was administering claims, actually, before being a lobbyist. So I try not to take it too personally. Things got so bad that it became a recall issue somehow. Workers' comp. It was the car tax, rolling blackouts, and workers' comp insurance were sort of the three-legged stool on which Schwarzenegger ran and took out Gray Davis and did what he did. Obviously, Arnold gets elected, and as we noted here, the guillotine swings back. What happened in large part before 2010, 2012 is that labor and the applicant attorneys would team up and pass really bad legislation that was bad for employers. And then employers would team up when things got out of control and do benefit takeaways and, emergency cost-cutting reforms. And you had this sort of guillotine pendulum, pendulum as a guillotine, sort of swinging back and forth, just leading to constant instability, benefit cuts, cost-driving behavior, all of these very bad things. And then sometime around 2010, 2012, employers and labor sat down together and realized, man, this would work a lot better if we just got along. And when benefits needed to be increased, we offset those new costs with system stabilizing reforms. And that's where you got some civilized reforms in 2012 and 2016. It's been 10 years plus since we've been there, since we've done that. And we're probably on the doorstep, frankly, of more of that. I think from a CCWC perspective, what we really want to see is a continuation of that civilized reform. We want to see more instances of labor and management sitting down and working things out and having a stable system of insurance. Obviously, if you look at the state of California, the various lines of insurance, property, liability, cyber, et cetera, they are all pretty tragic right now. Workers' comp is at least relatively stable, and it's because of this type of approach to legislating that keeps us there. Okay, so the other thing I want to touch on before we talk about bills is, why do legislators do what they do? As it turns out, they are normal people like me, like you. They have lives, they have histories, they have places that they came from, and they are drinking through a fire hose. So a legislator gets elected, they come up to Sacramento, they come from, let's say, Stockton. So they've got their maybe local government issues that they were working on in Stockton. They've got some exposure to other public policy issues, but suddenly they came up here and they've got to be experts on everything, including workers' compensation insurance. So what they do is they lean on their existing relationships, just like normal people, right? Chances are they were locally elected public officials, and they've got relationships with labor unions. The trial bar is really good at establishing relationships with folks nice and early. So they come in sort of trusting those types of entities that have helped them get elected, that they've got some overlap in political philosophy with. So for a lot of Democrats, it's going to be very natural to have positive relationships with attorneys and labor unions. You are going to have a lot of district-specific concerns. So you might live in a district that's very focused on aerospace. Well, you're going to care a lot about aerospace workers. You've got that density of workers and that density of industry in your district. You might have prominent individuals with prominent opinions in your district, and you might know the CEO of XYZ company, what have you. So they're coming in with those existing relationships. And then broadly, I'm going to talk about Democrats here. Broadly, their political tendencies lead them to want to disagree with us on most of our issues. So they're going to favor worker protection over employer stability. At the end of the day, there's a sort of power dynamic there, and the legislature wants to make sure that in this competition of ideals that the weight is towards protecting workers. They also believe largely, and I've had legislators say this to me face to face in very direct terms, they have a lot of faith in us as businesses, and they think we can adapt. I think that's underappreciated in terms of why the legislature decides to do things that they are told by us, by other organizations, by companies are problematic. And a lot of that is they actually believe that we'll adjust just fine. They care deeply about income inequality, and they all have their own individual passions. Some of them may be environmentalists, first and foremost. Some of them may care about greenhouse gases versus recycling. These are all a collection of individuals, and when we're lobbying them, when we're talking to them about bills, what we really need to be doing is talking to them as individuals, figuring out what they care about, and then educating them in a way that is useful. The other thing that you have to understand is that they are all generally generalists. Nobody's coming in with workers' compensation knowledge. There's like one applicant attorney who's in the legislature. She's actually fantastic to work with. But most people do not have any deep knowledge of workers' compensation or our specific issues. They are going to be operating at a much higher level. They're going to be going back to those relationships that they trust and listening to their interpretation because they've got some connectivity there, okay? So in large part, what we do is we try to interfere in those existing relationships, those existing sort of hierarchies of trust, and get them to understand a different perspective. But fundamentally, these are all just normal people trying to do normal things. A little bit about California. We're obviously expensive. You know that. I know that. We're expensive compared to every state. The thing that you need to remember about the state legislature is they understand very clearly that everything is more expensive in California. This is sort of like the price of being here and being in the sunshine all day. And again, this goes back to the adaptation point. You're going to adapt in some way. So this on its own isn't going to change minds in the legislature. We've been pointing out that we're either number one, two, or three most expensive state for workers' compensation. Even if you point to the percent of the median, the legislature will largely shrug its shoulders and say, well, we do better for workers here in the state of California, and that's why it's more expensive. And if that's the price of admission, that's the price of admission. And that's something that we need to contend with. This is the other thing that legislators see. Workers' comp rates aren't bad. So not everybody's insured. Probably most of you on this call are not, $1 insured. But legislators look at this line, except they look at it going back to 2004, and it looks like a hike you don't want to go on. It's a steep decline in cost. So when they're doing sort of a comparative analysis and saying, okay, I hear you complaining about what's in these bills, but workers' comp insurance is cheaper than it's been in the last 20 years. Sort of what are you crying about? This is, again, something that we need to contend with. Because it is just true that there have been significant declines since the early 2000s. Again, going back to that sort of thoughtful approach to benefits and reforms, that's the reason for that. But I mostly show you these things to say, there are data points that the legislators, committee staff are looking at that tell them, despite our protestations, things are just fine. Okay, this obviously might be coming to an end. We just saw a pretty sizable increase out of the insurance commissioner. And I'll just say, prices or experience was already beyond the pure premium advisory rate anyway. My suspicion is you're going to see more in the coming years. So we might be entering a bit of a phase where we can point to rising costs and say, hey, there is, in fact, a problem here. Okay, let's talk bills. CCWC sponsored a bill this year. We spend a fair amount of time killing bills. It's sort of what we do. And listen, it's good work. We enjoy it thoroughly. We get out there and we really go to the mat on these bills. We feel like we're in the right place. We try to be very reasonable. We try to collaborate with legislators when they're working on bills, but we spend a lot of time in that space. And frankly, the politics of the state require us to spend most of our time preventing bad things from happening. We think that's a highly valuable service to our members. I could keep you up at night with all the bills that we've killed over the last 20 years, but I won't do that here. Just pointing out, when you try to start taking a proactive stance, when you've been mostly opposing people's bills, it can be somewhat complicated. So we did want to start moving the dial back in the other direction, and start being a little bit more proactive. So we started with this bill this year, AB 1293 by Assemblymember Wallace. This was really driven by the board's concern around the quality of QME reports. Obviously, there was a state auditor's report that was done, I want to say in 2018, 2019 timeframe, that identified a variety of problems with the panel QME process. The state got right on one resolution, which was increase what doctors are paid for their reports. They did that, check. But from an employer perspective, we don't feel like a lot else was done on the quality front. So we introduced a bill that did a handful of things. Some of them are even still left in the bill. One, we wanted to have the division create template forms that could be used by the parties, not mandatory forms, but templates that could be used that would help drive quality. First, I think, in the sort of garbage in, garbage out, explanation, we wanted to make sure that report requests were being done completely and exhaustively. So the DWC will be, through an open regulatory process, establishing a template panel QME request form. And our hope is that that will help employers, everybody, all of the parties, request better information from panel QME so you get more complete reports back. The other thing that we are putting into the law, but frankly, as I understand it, been a sort of conversation at the DWC anyway, is a template panel QME report. Now, this is just something that makes sure that all the statutorily and regulatorily required components are, in a template that providers can use. Again, our hope being that this drives some better behavior, that people utilize the resources that are given to them, and provide better inputs and outputs. We had also included in the bill a requirement for the DWC to review certain panel QME reports, that are rejected by a judge as insufficient evidence. Also, panel QME reports that are reported as allowed under current law to the medical director as insufficient or incomplete. The DWC is reviewing some reports now. I think our assessment was that it's not enough, and that we would like more oversight in this regard. Certainly, if you're an employer, you have a fair amount of oversight in your conduct in the system, and it may help here as well. Unfortunately, I think in order to secure support from the administration, we needed to take those pieces out, but conversations are continuing with them about their review of reports, and I think we hope to get our hands on a few of the most recent annual reports that has actual data about how many reports were reviewed, what were the outcomes, et cetera. And we could see additional legislation in coming years. But this bill moved through the legislature. I really appreciated, frankly, the collaboration that we got from the Applicant Attorneys Association and Labor. We talked to them very early, addressed some concerns, and again, when you collaborate, good things can happen. We're pleased to have the bill signed by the governor, and it's a good first step to sort of being more proactive and stepping outside of our normal role of sort of preventing bad things from happening. All right. There was a collection of anti-fraud bills. CCWC supported all three of these. First, AB 1398 by Assemblymember Valencia. This bill was basically improving the rules around financial disclosure. There were some court cases that sort of muddied the waters a bit and made it more difficult to get press felony charges for sort of illegal referrals. And this cleans that up. That bill was signed by the governor. SB 536, this was a bill that would have given insurers access to EDD payroll data so they can do basically payroll audits of their insureds. This bill was held in the Assembly Insurance Committee. I think conversations will continue in the coming years. CCWC supported the bill. We are anti-fraud, no matter who's doing the fraud. And then SB 847 by Assemblymember Reyes. This is the applicant attorney I told you about. Actually, this bill protects against uninsured employers discharging property when the state is coming after them to recover what they spent in the uninsured employers benefit trust fund. So all of these were good bills. AB 1398 and SB 847 were signed by the governor. Those will be law January of 2026. And SB 536 has a shot next year to continue along. But all in all, some decent bills there. All right, variety pack. Some smaller bills, mostly because some of them were held up. But AB 1048, I'm just going to sort of go down the line here. AB 1048 is a contract transparency bill. The initial bill would have required payers to produce a contract basically every time it's requested by a medical provider if the bill was reduced based on a contract. There were a lot of problems with this bill. It's sponsored by the California Association of Orthopedic Doctors. We are trying to work with them and some other stakeholders to reach a sort of reasonable accommodation. Really, the issue here is contract transparency in all of its forms. We think that we'll be able to reach an agreement before the end of next year and have something done. I think this is one of those issues that's in everybody's interest to clean up. To the extent that there's murkiness in these contracts, it doesn't serve anybody's interest. But that bill is a 2-year bill. The author and the sponsor actually agreed at the request of the opposition to hold that bill into the new year to allow us more time to work on it. And now we owe them some thoughtful responses to the conversation. AB 1498 by Assemblymember Soria. This is sort of a continuation of this discussion of developing a California MPN. If you remember, well, 5-6 years ago, they're all running together for me at this point. There was a bill that would have created a California MPN, and this is how it would have worked. It basically would have said, every doctor that's in California that accepts workers' comp is in the California MPN. And hey, workers, you can either use the MPN that your employer provides, or you can use this other MPN. So it basically would have gutted employer MPNs completely and allowed an exit from those. This version of the bill was narrower. It was focused on the Central Valley and sort of challenges around access to medical treatment, which is, sort of nationwide a rural concern. But instead of sort of leaving it a general issue, they basically tried to make the case that this access to care question stops injured workers from having easy access to workers' compensation treatment. And for that reason, that we need this broader MPN to provide them reasonable access. That bill was made a 2-year bill. Obviously, we're never going to get to a point where we can agree to sort of sidelining our own medical provider networks, understanding that they probably have a varying degree of utility depending upon how much time and effort you put into setting your MPN up. But for many of our members, for a lot of our members, these are absolutely critical tools that they have in their toolbox. So unlike the prior bill, I don't think this is one that we're ever going to get to yes on, but we will have more conversations in the coming year. SB 8 by Senator Angelique Ashby from here in Sacramento. This expands 4850 pay for park rangers, but only in Sacramento County. Previously, there have been a handful of bills that would have done this statewide. Currently, LA County already pays 4850 time for park rangers. It's in the labor code, but it's just LA County. So prior efforts to move this to a statewide policy were vetoed and or stopped in the legislature. Senator Ashby took a more narrow approach and focused on her county of Sacramento and was successful in getting that bill passed and signed. So January 1st, if you're Sacramento County, you are now paying 4850 time for your park rangers. And that is that. SB 668 by Senator Hurtado. This was dealing with med legal fees. This bill basically would have required the DWC every year or two to update the medical legal fee schedule, whether they wanted to do that or not. Obviously, the DWC has existing authority. They can update this fee schedule whenever duty calls. That bill was made a 2-year bill. We opposed that bill. We opposed all 4 of these bills. We'll keep it simple. All of these bills, with the exception of SB 8, which was signed, could be active again next year. I didn't say this at the beginning. I probably should have. The legislature operates on a 2-year legislative session, so we are now finishing the 2025 year of the 2025-2026 legislative session. Most bills that don't make it to the governor in the first year are eligible to move in the subsequent year. So it's sort of like zombies popping out of the ground. Bills that we dispensed with this year will find new life next year, and we'll have to deal with them again. We're getting close to Halloween, so a little zombie reference for you. Okay. Told you we talk a little bit about AI. This is where that starts. One of the big topics in the legislature this year, and which CCWC was engaged pretty actively, was this question around workplace surveillance. You see sort of the policy questions that we've got highlighted there. You know, how and when is it appropriate to surveil workers in the workplace? What oversight, regulatory oversight should be available, and what privacy rights do employees have in the workplace? You know, this means in your workstation, walking down the halls, in the lunchroom. Technically, you're off work maybe when you're in the lunchroom, maybe not all the time. But where and when is it appropriate to surveil employees? And for what purpose? Are we surveilling employees for productivity reasons? Are we trying to make sure, that employee X is kicking out the appropriate number of widgets on a line? Are we monitoring package delivery drivers and their conduct in their vehicle and as they approach customers? Do we just have cameras and surveillance up and about? What happens to that film, audio, data? All of these are sort of questions that the legislature is grappling with. So there were 2 bills sort of in this area, AB 1221 by Assemblymember Bryan and AB 1331 by Assemblymember El-Hawari. Different bills. I'm not going to go into the specifics of each one other than to say we opposed AB 1331 very directly and pretty aggressively because, among other things, it would have made the practice of surveilling injured workers who you think are committing fraud illegal. You would not be able to hire a private investigator to conduct surveillance. We thought that was pretty wild. The author's office had indicated that actually wasn't their intent, but they refused to take it out of the bill once we identified it for them, which left us predictably fussy. We were successful in sort of forcing amendments to the bill on the first House floor, and so we eventually removed opposition. But there are a lot of problems with these bills broadly. One, they were just drafted way too broadly. It applies to camera, phone apps, productivity measurements, all sorts of other devices. And as I said before, would have eliminated the workers' comp surveillance. They're poorly scoped. They don't really deal with the modern complexities of workplaces. For instance, it would have applied to airports. Well, everything is under surveillance in airports, and for good reason. We did 20 years of war in the Middle East because we weren't quite careful enough at the airports. So, as a public policy imperative, it would seem to make sense that you would not want to do that. What about public buildings and schools? Obviously, there has been in the public sector a fair amount of new liability for child sexual assault and molestation. Well, this would have taken surveillance out of some of those workplaces. That's obviously problematic when your real duty as an employer, as a protector of the people on your site, is to detect and prevent bad things from happening. So obviously that was really problematic. Writ large, it just would have made surveillance perilous, too complicated, easy to trip up on the specifics, penalties, private rights of action, just way too difficult. It would have created an incentive for reducing the type of surveillance you have, which would then increase liability in other areas. You're not going to have a video record of accidents that occur, by third parties. You're not going to know, maybe if a third party caused a workplace accident, you won't have evidence to that effect. So a lot of problems there. And then honestly, just would have made workplaces less safe for both employees and the public, less deterrence, less evidence, more spaces unmonitored. So both of these bills were held up in the legislature. AB 1221 was held up in the Appropriations Committee. AB 1331 was defeated on the Senate floor even after much of the bill had been stripped out by the California Labor Federation, who was the sponsor of that bill. So this is an area that's going to continue in the coming year, maybe years, plural. There is going to be a lot of energy in this space. And then obviously from a CCWC perspective, we'll continue to watch this from a workplace safety perspective. And then obviously specific workers' compensation concerns around surveillance, et cetera, evidence collection, and what have you. But that is what we're dealing with on this particular issue. Okay, another AI issue. Automated decision systems. And in case you're wondering, Jason, where did you get that cool picture? I actually asked ChatGPT to create a self-portrait in its favorite artistic style, and this is what it gave me. Not at all creepy. I wanted to pass that little bit of information along to you. I kind of like his hair, if I'm being honest. So automated decision systems. This is another sort of AI technology category of legislation that we need to be watching. And that is really, how should technology be used to make critical decisions about any variety of things. There is some applicability in the workers' comp context. I think as more and more technology comes into the claims handling process, because of the way that these bills define an automated decision system and the way that they define sort of the scope of decisions that are subject to regulation, there could absolutely be some workers' compensation impacts here. We did not take active positions on these bills, but we were watching them very closely. I can frankly see us engaging in future years more directly, again, especially as more technology comes through. But in broad terms, the legislature is very concerned about how technology is being used to replace human decision-making in critical instances, determining eligibility for loans, other financial transactions, eligibility for government benefits, any number of things. Let's say that we start using technology to make initial decisions about utilization review, right? Obviously, we're still required to have doctors and nurses, but if that type of technology was deployed there, we would be subject to the requirements of these types of bills. So as we modernize very quickly across every industry, as AI, automated decision systems are utilized and deployed in more areas, the legislature is going to be engaging in this type of oversight, and they are going to want to create a sort of broadly applicable regulatory paradigm to make sure that, for instance, automated decision systems aren't engaged in sort of blatant discrimination. Obviously, discriminating as an employer, a human being, is wrong and actionable. It is also if a system does it. But I think what the legislature would want is for us to detect those types of outcomes being possible in systems and then engineer around them. But this is a growing issue, one that will stay with us, sort of like that workplace surveillance issue, over the next several years, many. For what it's worth, AB 1018 was stopped in the legislature. It was defeated on the Senate floor. I think that was the far more expansive version of the bills. SB 7, though, was vetoed by the governor, who has been particularly strong on AI and sort of associated tech issues in his signatures and vetoes. Obviously, California being sort of in the center of the universe as it relates to AI. All right. AB 1336 by Assemblymember Addis. This is a redo of the farm worker presumption bill that was passed and vetoed by the governor last year. Everybody that's promoting this bill sort of admits out loud that this is not a workers' comp bill, that it's really meant to pressure employers to comply with Cal OSHA regulations. The way that the bill works is it would say, if you don't comply with Cal OSHA heat illness regulations and there is a resulting instance of workplace heat illness, then a presumption applies. So any of you who spend any amount of time administering workers' comp claims sort of understand that the condition to apply the presumption makes the presumption unnecessary. You've already sort of indicated that it's workplace heat illness that resulted from conduct in the workplace. It's now workers' comp claim. So all you're left with is the mess that is created by this bill. It's silent on who adjudicates the question of whether or not the employer was adhering to the Cal OSHA regulations. Under what timeline does that happen? If a presumption applies, you no longer have 90 days to decide compensability on the claim, you have 75 days. So how quickly are you getting this information from the state about whether or not you were compliant and whether or not a presumption applies? The bill is just a mess. And I think, the legislature, for their part, again, going back to what drives their behavior, they're thinking, well, this is an appropriate use of the workers' compensation system because it'll drive better behavior. We get that it's messy, but we don't care because, broadly speaking, we need to focus on protecting workers. That's where you get some of the dysfunctional policy, where the sort of politics outweighs the practical concerns that have been expressed with the bill. But the governor, true to form, vetoed this bill again and offered some words about how he was directing his administration and had been directing his administration to focus on enforcement of those regulations. SB 632 by Argine, and I'm sorry, I'm going to run over a little bit. Stick with me. SB 632 by Argine. This is the 10th attempt by the Nurses Association to do an expansive presumption for any hospital employee who's engaged in direct patient care at an acute care hospital. This thing has always been so broad. It included everything I had in the slide. The items that are crossed out were removed from the bill by one of the appropriations committees. This bill was ultimately held by the Assembly Insurance Committee and did not proceed. It is going to come back next year. The only thing that I think may be different this year is, one of the things we've said over and over about this bill and other bills is there's no research to indicate that there's any kind of problem whatsoever. There's no research indicating that nurses or, other employees are seeing these types of claims denied or in any way sort of challenged at a rate that's different than other employees. We continue to think that the bill is entirely unnecessary. And then the other aspect of this bill is it would be not the first, but the first maybe permanent presumption that applies broadly to the private sector. A lot of the private sector looks at presumptions as sort of like government on government violence and wants it to stay there. There is one presumption for private sector firefighters in certain circumstances, and then obviously there was the COVID presumption, but that went away and is no longer. So this bill will return. It's just a matter of time. It's been a mainstay of my career as a lobbyist. So a little bit of Groundhog Day, in case you're wondering what that image is. This bill is maybe the biggest disappointment of the year for me. SB 487 by Grayson. This bill essentially applies to police and firefighter claims, and it impacts employer ability to recover from responsible third parties. So basically what the bill says is that employers for police and firefighter claims are only allowed to recover 1/3 of the available insurance. The other 2/3 goes to the injured worker and their lawyer, so long as they demonstrate losses that are exceeding the policy limit, and everybody can't go home with their money. The other thing it does is it eliminates credits for the amount recovered by the injured worker. We thought this was a horrible bill. It applied both to local and state government at one point, which we thought would surely earn us a veto. However, very late in the legislative session, the state of California was removed from the bill. So this only applies to local governments. This does not apply to the state. The state can still recover fully. And unfortunately, the governor signed this bill into law. So as of January 1st, 2026, you are going to be severely limited in your recoveries. I would settle those cases before that change happens, although you might have a problem from here on out doing that. Very unfortunate bill. Okay, permanent disability. There was a couple of bills that touch on PD this year. One was SB 555 by Senator Caballero. PD was last increased in 2014, so we've obviously not kept up with inflation. This bill would have applied the Social Security COLA to the weekly benefit for permanent disability, would have resulted in modest annual increases. I don't think we oppose this bill because we believe that PD shouldn't be increased. I think we have a larger system concern. We don't think setting things on autopilot is a good approach. We think that employers and labor should occasionally sit down and increase benefits as a team and then offset those new costs with system reforms. That's the way we've maintained stability in the past. We think we should keep doing that in the future. We as much as offered to do that this year with this bill, and labor expressed a lack of interest. So that is what it is. The other bill, that bill, for what it's worth, was held up. The author sort of stopped advancing her own bill, which was interesting, I think in large part because a conversation wasn't occurring. On the SIBTF, there was AB 1329 by Assemblymember Ortega. This was a bill that included, frankly, many of the changes that we would all want to see to the SIBTF, but it also had some things that we didn't like. And I think the biggest indictment against the bill is that it wasn't a complete project. It was a sort of, if you're like me in elementary school and middle high, it was an incomplete. So there's just more that needs to be done. The governor, for his part, had indicated in his January budget and the May revise that he wanted to tackle problems with the SIBTF, which are out of control and costing employers a wild amount of money. He wanted to do so in a comprehensive form. This bill did not meet that standard, and the bill was vetoed. In vetoing the bill, the governor indicated, hey, I'm directing the Department of Industrial Resources to bring me a proposal to include in my January budget in 2026 that constitutes substantial reform based on what we actually need. So I think coming into next year, we are really positive that we'll be able to continue working with the governor, with the legislature, with Assemblymember Ortega. The applicant attorneys are the ones who sponsored this legislation on a full and complete adjustment to the SIBTF to move it back towards sanity. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. Okay, 2026, got another 2 or 3 minutes and we'll be done. Apologies for going over. Lobbyists talk a lot. It's a thing. Next year is the last year of Governor Newsom. Every new governor gives me mild anxiety, right? It's you never know what they're going to do. Are they going to be like Jerry Brown has been, and Gavin Newsom has been? Will they learn the lessons of Gray Davis, or have there been enough governors since Gray Davis was recalled that they sort of forget and start doing what Gray Davis did, which was signing every bad bill that was sent to him? So we will have to find out. We've got one more year with Gavin Newsom, and then we're in a new era. My major message for next year is I think opportunity knocks. Again, we like collaboration. We like working together. Obviously, there's some tension around PD benefits, and obviously employers have a variety of needs. That's the perfect formula for people to get together and do interesting things. I think at the top of the employer list is cumulative trauma. You don't need to know much about workers' comp to understand that cumulative trauma is just very different in the state of California than it is in any other jurisdiction. And it leads to a lot of bad behaviors and a lot of outrageous costs for employers. I think it's time to make some forward motion on that issue. Obviously, med legal expenses, both of these could be much longer lists, but I really wanted to focus them. I do think in the coming year, there will be energy into resolving some of these issues, and I'm personally really looking forward to it.